Hey everyone, just echoing for those who are just joining. We're gonna give it a few more, maybe like another minute, and then we'll kick things off. We're just letting some more folks into the room. Okay, folks are still trickling in, but I think we should go ahead and get started. Welcome to BAVC Media's VERSED summer slash fall series to support filmmakers with their grants and program applications. This Bay Area Film Funder panel is the third of five in this special series. My name is Jess Epstein. I am the Associate Director of Strategic Partnerships here at BAVC Media. I'm a white woman with dark brown hair that's pulled back in a bun, wearing a black t-shirt and a striped green and white button down. Versed is intended to be the most accessible format of training that we offer here at BAVC Media. We use this platform to address the most contemporary topics in the media arts field, and it's a great way for everyone to get involved, learn more about what we do here at BAVC, and join our creative community. If you haven't signed up for this workshop through our membership program, be sure to check that out to get discounts on future workshops, along with tons of other great benefits like discounts on longer format training sessions, exclusive events, and community building. Just a couple of minutes of general housekeeping for this Zoom session. Please take some time to introduce yourself in the chat with your fellow attendees and submit your questions for the panel. We'll be monitoring that throughout this session. The second half of the panel will be open for audience questions. We do have auto closed captions turned on, so they're available if you'd like to use them. As a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be shared out to all of those who have RSVP'd. And lastly, at the end of this session, I will be sending out a link to get your responses and feedback on how everything went. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Brittany, our moderator, to get us started today.
Hi everyone, I'm very excited to be here and very honored to be speaking with our amazing panel of representative of our great Bay Area funders. My name is Brittany Rayo. My pronouns are she, her. My visual description, I am a 35-year-old white woman with long, dirty blonde hair and a blue t-shirt, and my background is the classic psychedelic BAVC Media background. Um, I'm representing BAVC Media today. I work on the artist development team, supporting many programs, but most importantly, our Media Maker Fellowship, which supports documentary filmmakers working on their first feature. Yeah, and I'm pleased to introduce Don Valadez, my colleague, who will be on the panel today.
Great. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Don Valadez. I'm the Director of Youth and Artist Development at BAVC Media and the co-director of our Media Maker Fellowship. And oh, yeah, visual description of me. I'm a light-skinned Chicana with silver gray hair and black sparkly shirt and the psychedelic background, but with lavender behind me. Yeah, and we'll get it. I don't know what else should I say anything else about what I'm a
Sorry,
filmmaker. Oh, I'm a filmmaker also. I'm a documentary filmmaker as well. So I come to this work both as a person who has applied and worked on raising money for films, as well as being someone who has supported giving out money. And I'm also on the board of the Berkeley Film Foundation. So I've been a reviewer on that board as well. I think that's it.
Sorry, I should have specified. Thank you, Don, for winging it. Everyone can say their name, their pronouns, their visual description, what organization they're representing, a brief intro to your organization, and any filmmaker opportunities that you have available. And then we'll move on to questions. So I will pass the baton to Isabella.
Hi, everybody. So nice to be here. Thank you, BAVC, Brittany, Jessica, and Dawn for organizing us today. This is a great opportunity to talk to filmmakers about our work and what we do. My name is Isabella Miller. I'm the program director of the Berkeley Film Foundation. My pronouns are she, her. I am a brunette. I am a white Japanese woman with a black shirt on and puffy sleeves. And let's see, we have 2 grant cycles that are open to the public every year at the Berkeley Film Foundation. We are a regional fund that provides grants in production, post-production, and distribution, specifically to filmmakers who are located in the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area. So we are a regional fund, but we have 2 grant cycles per year. One is for documentary documentary applications, and then we have narrative shorts, a narrative short grant program that just closed. That is in the fall or end of summer, fall, and our documentary program starts in the spring. We do have a third grant cycle, but it's only available to existing grantees, and that's a film festival, emergency fund. So if you're an existing grantee, you're able to apply for a quick grant that provides urgent funding for your team to make it to a film festival or expenses related to that. So for the moment, we are actually done with our open call grant application programs for this year, but we have many screenings that will be happening later this year, all throughout the Bay Area. So please stay tuned for that. And I'll stop there. I'll go into our grant programs a lot more later.
Thank you, Isabella. Next on my screen is Masashi. Do you want to go next?
Oh, I'm happy to. Hi, everyone. My name is Masashi Niwano. My pronouns are he, him, and my visual description is I am an Asian American man wearing a nature print sweater with a blurry background. I'm the director of artist development at SFFILM. SFFILM is a nonprofit organization whose mission fuels the entire cycle of the cinematic experience. That is why we support filmmakers at all stages of production, from screenwriting and R&D, ultimately to the big screen. We have a dynamic portfolio of grants, fellowships, and residencies for all types of filmmakers, narrative, documentary, hybrid, for filmmakers based here in the Bay Area, but beyond as well. Most of our programs we're in review mode right now, going to make some very exciting announcements in the fall, and then they'll reopen in early 2026. Since 2009, we have granted over $11 million to the independent film community. Over 500 films have been supported through our different initiatives. As Isabella just said, I think I'll talk through some of these programs in a little bit. But if you are local, we are currently accepting applications for our 2026 Filmhouse Residency. If you don't know, our Filmhouse Residency provides Bay Area-based filmmakers with artistic guidance, office space, a vibrant creative community, and a sustained support from established film industry professionals. As a film outside of artist development, we have an educational department where we focus on introducing kids and teens to the power of cinema. We also have a robust array of year-round screenings, including our SF International Film Festival, which will be happening next in April of 2026. Another cheap plug here is our call for entries is open for our festival. So if you have a film in post-production, you should submit it on our website, sffilm.org. Thank you, Babe, for having me.
Thank you. Allegra, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hello, I am Allegra Madsen. I use she, her pronouns. My visual description, I am a mixed race woman with kind of fluffy gray and curly hair. Trying to figure. I don't want to talk about it because I used a new hair care product and I don't know if I like it. And I am in a very, very plain room, the only room in my house where you wouldn't see teenagers running behind me. I am the executive director and programmer at Frameline, the San Francisco International LGBTQ plus film festival. We are in the midst of our 2025 completion fund cycle, which funds films in funds queer films in post production to help get them over the finish line, and we have a couple of other grant opportunities as well that I for young filmmakers, and yeah, I'm sure I'll talk about those more as we come on as the program continues. And yeah, like Masashi, our festival submissions open on October 1st.
Wonderful, thank you. And Jonathan.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you, BAVC, for having me. My name is Jonathan White. I'm the Director of Operations and Fiscal Sponsorship with the Redford Center. Pronouns he, him. I'm a white man with very short buzz cut blonde and some gray hair, wearing a gray polo shirt and glasses. Redford Center is a San Francisco-based nonprofit and a film funder, co-founded in 2005 by activists and filmmakers Robert Redford and his son Jamie. And we are one of the only US-based nonprofits dedicated solely to environmental impact filmmaking. Since 2005, Redford Center has produced 3 feature documentaries, 40 short films, supported over 400 film and media projects with grants and other services, and we've dispersed more than $32 million to environmental film projects through granting and fiscal sponsorship. As far as open programs, which I'll go into some more depth as well later, we have a flagship grants program that runs every 2 years that we're in the process of tying up the second year. For the current cohort, the next open cycle will be spring, most likely March or April of 2026. It's a 2-year program. It's for environmental feature-length documentaries. It's a 2-part grant, and there's a film summit that we host for filmmakers, as well as mentorship throughout the 2-year cycle. We also have a Nature Connection pitch program that is opening shortly, actually in October. Exact date hasn't been announced yet. And that will be focused on short documentaries, generally 15 to 30 minutes, on the theme of restoring humanity's connection with the outdoors. And there'll be a whole lot more information on those to come. And then finally, one of the programs that I run is fiscal sponsorship. It's quite a big service program that we run for environmental documentary filmmakers. That's it.
Fantastic. Thank you all for being here. I just wanted to say that I forgot to mention that BAVC also has a fiscal sponsorship program, and that we have an application for that as well that is rolling. Great. So the first question I have for everyone, what are you looking for in the projects that your organization funds? This can be specific to one grant or program or across the programs that you run. And go ahead and just jump in if you want to take it first.
That's the hardest question. I'll just, if nobody else is gonna jump in, it's the hardest question because, like, at least from my perspective, I really want it to be something that I can quantify, but sometimes it's a qualitative thing. A lot of times, or for me, I'm generally looking for projects that are pushing a conversation forward, and specifically at Frameline is pushing the queer conversation forward in a direction that that is surprising, or the form, a project that's playing with the form a little bit, or anything that feels new, surprising, and tackling the issues in an interesting way. We don't have a hard and fast formula. Like if you hit these benchmarks, you're bound to succeed. But I think something that's really important is that the people that are watching your films when you submit are passionate film people. They generally really are excited to see what you have, but they're also watching a lot of films. Like we'll likely get 1,000+ submissions to the completion fund in our festival, and like it's a lot. So you have to grab people with your vision quickly and hold them. So I wish there was more concrete a concrete roadmap I could give you, but it is something about telling a story in a new way or pushing the conversation forward for me. I totally agree, Allegra, thank you. It is very difficult to quantify, and I've had many phone calls with filmmakers who we haven't funded, and it's very difficult to explain. Anyway, but I will try here. We as a funder, we don't have a festival that we support specifically, but for funding, we are looking for projects that are rooted in social or environmental justice. We really are looking for films that address a systemic issue or highlight a societal concern and do it in a creative way, through good character development and just visual creativity overall. I do want to be clear that you don't necessarily need to have an explicit call to action to have a successful, I guess, to be chosen by us. It's not, we've funded plenty of profile pieces or local history pieces, so it's not like that. But there needs to be an overall theme that's specific to immigration, incarceration, climate change, something like that. That's really something we're looking for. And I need to be more clear that this is the documentary in particular. And as Allegra also said, using creative techniques to really tell a story. I am also really leaning into the hybrid style these days. I'm really amazed to see what people are doing to bend genres and introduce elements into both narratives and documentaries. I also need to be clear that we only fund narrative shorts at the moment. We are funding films under 40 minutes, and we give away about $350,000 to $400,000 a year. So, our funding fluctuates, but we aren't able to support narrative features really in a meaningful way yet. I hope that changes. But to stay on the question of narrative shorts, we're looking for very strong scripts that give great visual descriptions, allow the reader to be absorbed into the story and into the scene you're trying to paint. But also more technically, we're looking for films that are doable and are realistic. If you're making a film that is set on a spaceship and the budget is $30,000, that's probably something we're not going to consider realistic. So that is something we definitely look at. I guess on a more technical note, we are also looking for films that, you don't have to necessarily have organizational funding behind the project when you apply, but we do really like to see films that have a plan for raising money beyond the grant that BFF gives you, and again, you don't have to have anything locked in right away, but just having some indication of what that plan is really it strengthens your application considerably. So, and I guess I'll lament on that for one more moment to say we also really love it when documentaries and specifically have some ties, some organizational ties behind the project. It doesn't mean that they've necessarily funded you, but you can rely on an organization to help promote your film, get their audience to be a part of your audience. And having that alignment is really encouraging to see in an application. And I'm sure, I could go on and on, but I'll stop there for now. And I'm sure I'll come back to it later. Thanks.
I can go next. Yeah, I'm trying to figure the best way to tackle this question because we do have a nice portfolio of different types of grants, right? And there's specifics to each one that make them unique. And we wear different helmets as we're looking at different projects. And then we have the kind of umbrella. What are we looking? What is the synergy between all of these? Within a year, we support over 50 projects, narratives and documentaries. I can I'll do the quickest of things. And I would just, again, say, if you are interested, go to our website, sffilm.org. I'm really doing the shortest versions, but we have a Rainin grant. We partner with the Rainin Foundation here. And so we're looking for films, narratives that are in all stages of production, that have some social minded topic, issue, experience in that project. We come in because we're also looking at voice perspective in there. But with that Rainin grant, you get $25,000. We select about 17 every year. We have 2 Sloan grants. So we partner with the Sloan Foundation, and those are narrative projects or hybrid that have some kind of science or technology as part of the storytelling, character, something in there that is real. But again, because they're partnering with SFFILM, we're looking for innovation. We're looking for exciting stories that may tackle science and technology, but doing it in a new, innovative way. We have a new grant called the Cedar Road IAGI grant. This is for bold new representations of Asian and Asian Americans. And that one is kind of clear there, but that is specific. And that one gets about $20,000. Should have mentioned Sloan is 35. For all of those are all different things, but I think, agree with Isabella and Allegra here. I think when I'm looking at application, I think all of us, so we have a wonderful community of people looking at all of our applications. We're actually right in the middle of reviewing lots of applications, so this is very top of mind. I think what we're looking for is to be impressed, to be surprised by an application. What I love about cinema is that every project and filmmaker is different. And so there is no box here. And so as we're looking at an application, we are looking at how realistic it is. And to the point of, we are supporting films at early stages, screenwriting, R&D, right? And then we also support narrative and docs and post-production. So we're looking at them in different ways of what is the footage versus what is the concept. So if the film's at earlier stages, there's more flexibility on what the film will turn out to be, but the core of it has to be something that, again, is something that we feel is really important, that these are filmmakers and projects we want to support. The other thing I would say here is we really want a diversity of filmmakers and films being represented, whether it's through social justice, whether it is through all of our different grants. There's so much that's happening in the world, and really when we think about 50 projects, it's not really even touching all the things that need to be represented through cinema. So, we're looking at that as well. The last thing I'll say is that our filmmakers, we think of as a cohort. So outside of, we really are excited about this project and this filmmaker, we think of them in a cohort with other supported filmmakers, and how do they all connect? How are we building this community, right, together? So that's another element as we're looking at an application, is like, are we feeling their passion, their enthusiasm? Is there connection here that we think will really resonate well within a community of other filmmakers?
Okay, that's my turn. So yeah, apart from the just general, and I think this is true for all of us, looking for compelling stories, realistic budgets, and that cuts both ways, both not under budgeting or over budgeting. I think more frequently I see under budgeting, and that makes us a little worried about the experience level of the filmmaker, perhaps. And then, of course, work samples. And even if that's something like a mood board, if you don't actually have any footage to share, but this is a visual medium, so it's very hard to just read something that doesn't have any visual text or anything more than just text. But apart from that, there's 4 areas that we look at with our environmental impact filmmaking focus. And I think because we're so kind of narrowly niche focused on this, we can do this, and this crosses all of our programs. But the first thing that we look for is the project should have a strong focused potential for impact on either the communities or the themes that they're talking about, and impact beyond just views. And really, we're looking for an impact campaign plan, and that is part of our application. We're going to specify exactly what that means and what we're looking for, and that could be anything from a nationwide grassroots outreach and screening campaign to partnerships with other nonprofits or other organizations that are focused on the topics that your film covers, all to inspire change and or hopefully affect some kind of direct action. So we're really impact first. So we want filmmakers to be thinking about that while they're making the film, not when they get to the finish line. It really should be part of the film making process. They hopefully, some of the ones that stand out are usually compelling stories around communities and people or places that are either or underrepresented in popular or mainstream media. So we're just always looking for voices that we haven't heard from before. These should also avoid doomsday narratives, uplift grassroots movements, potentially highlight potential solutions. So those ones usually really stand out for us. And then finally, we really look to make sure that the filmmakers have non-extractive relationships, kind of ethically formed relationships with the communities that they're focused on, and have a plan for that, and really talk that through. So that is another, one of the questions in our application. So those are the 4 lenses that we're looking at, particularly in our feature length documentary grants program that runs every 2 years. But that covers all of our grant programs to some extent.
Yeah, I guess I'll follow up with the BAVC Media Maker Fellowship is both a grant program as well as a cohort-based model. We work with first-time feature documentary filmmakers who are, and again, working on their first feature. We really look at, we usually get not as many as Allegra or probably any of the rest of you get. We get probably around 200, close to 200 applications, but from that we have to select about 6 projects that we work with. So I think you can hear from everybody here that this is a very competitive process, and definitely going to the websites of all of our organizations and really thinking about like who have they funded in the past, what kinds of projects do they look at, and what are their guidelines really, what is the instructions around it. I mean, we're looking also for similar things that have been said here. We're broader. We can take films that really address broad critical issues, either historical or current times. We look at folks who are really thinking about what is their cinematic language. Well, this is a visual medium, as Jonathan said. We really want to see that people have an idea about how they are going to visually tell the story. And we also look at impact strategies, like where is this film going to go, and how are people going to use it? We really look too at who the makers are. I love that some people talked about, this idea of kind of ethical filmmaking, thinking about who it is this film is for, why we're making it, why am I the right person to make it? You'll see that in the core application, the way the questions are asked, that we're asking the questions about like, why you, why now? How is this film going to work in the world today, or in 5 years, or however long it takes for you to make the film. We also are often, because we are a cohort and a fellowship model, or a group model, we're often the first money in. So we're not looking at, do you have a lot of backup? Have you gotten grants, et cetera? But sort of like what Isabella said, we are looking, and I don't know if it was you who said that, but we are looking to see that people have, a reasonable budget, something that makes sense given what it is that they're going to take on, and that they have a plan or idea about some of the places that they may be getting the funding for the project. We know times are hard right now. We know things are difficult. So we are paying attention to what people are saying about how they're going to raise money for their films. Some of the traditional places that people have gone to are no longer, don't even exist anymore. So how are people looking at, strategically, what are they doing to raise money to make this film? And are they thinking carefully about how long it's going to take and who's on their team and things like that? So it's a pretty big range of like kinds of projects, and you can look at our websites and see what we've funded or people that we've brought into our cohort. It's super exciting. It's one of my, I love looking at people's applications. I care. I mean, like I said, I'm a filmmaker myself, so I know how hard this stuff is, and I know how challenging it is to put your ideas on paper. And we really encourage people to do that. We are probably one of the few places that gives people feedback if you ask for it, and we'll send you the feedback. We give raw feedback though. Sometimes it's not pretty. But I think as a filmmaker, I want to hear that. I want to hear why, what are people resonating with and what are people not? Yes, Susie, thanks. I know I'm seeing all these familiar faces here, but I want that real feedback. And you too, Shani, this stuff's hard. So yeah, I think that's enough for me.
Is it okay if I follow up on Dawn just for a moment? You sparked many things for me, Dawn, but in particular, I didn't mention the application, and I feel like that's important here. I really can't stress enough the importance of just taking the application seriously, and I know it's boring, and I know you've probably answered these questions 50 times in 50 different ways, but we can really tell, if someone hasn't really been thoughtful about a question. And it shows, and I one time told someone about our grant program, and an hour later they submitted the application, and I was just like, oh my gosh, there's no way they spent any time on this whatsoever. And it showed. And when I looked at it, you really could tell. So, and I guess on that thread to also, tell us the truth about what's going on, and tell us where you're at in the project, and tell us the truth in really every section of the application you can. I had someone who applied for funding this year who wasn't sure if they actually fit into the address requirements, because again, we're regional, and he had been displaced by the fires in LA, and I just really appreciated his honesty about his situation. And he had a fantastic application, but ultimately he wasn't in California anymore, so we had to pass on it. But that kind of honesty I just really appreciate. So that's just something I'll add here. And I know people will have a million questions about what that actually means, but it's case by case. But films are so hard. Don't tell us what you think we want to hear about where you are at in your project. Just tell us exactly what's going on. And if it's taken you 12 years to get here, like that's just something I'll add. Honesty is valued very highly.
I just wanted to add as well. Like I was listening to this, and like, yeah, we get a lot of applications. The field is like everybody. The field is really tight for everybody, which could sound discouraging. But you never know who's going to be your champion, and that person might not be able to fund you at that round. But this is a small community, and that person can be like, oh, it wasn't right for us at this moment, but I know something over here. And it's your first step with your film into like getting into that ecosystem, and you will end up with angels in the background, even if you don't get all the money that you apply for every time.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to add to it, just back to the importance of the application. It may feel tedious to fill it out. On the flip side, as the people who are reviewing it, like if we can sense it if it feels like it's, if there's not enthusiasm and all the things in it. I think when I'm looking at an application, there are some that just like kind of jump off the screen, and I think that to me is something that is really important. And I mention that because for us, especially if you're applying for something that's earlier stages, screenwriting, we don't expect our applicants to have it, let quote, all together. We don't need it to be the most professionally written. For me, like that's actually not exactly what we're looking for. What we're looking for is the human behind it. We're looking for the perspective. And most of our grants come with a year-round program where you would be working on your script, working on your samples, all those things. So just noting that if you're holding on applying to things until you have everything in place and it's like a perfect application, I would just encourage everyone to apply. You learn, and as Don mentioned, you can always reach out to the organizations and ask for feedback. I'm always happy to give feedback as well. But filling it out, I think it is a skill, right? And you learn how to write better and more confident as you move forward. But there's something in that teaches you what is important about your project. And we can really see, at least from my perspective, like what you're really excited about your project. And when applicants can like harness that enthusiasm, those strong elements to your project, I think those are the ones that stand out.
Yeah, I just add a quick, we did design our application pretty much to match exactly to the core application. So, once that's a lot. It's a heavy application. But once you've done it once, it really is just you're more or less copy pasting it if it's a similar type of grant. So, and we absolutely have examples of projects that have come to us, didn't even make the kind of second or third round cut, ended up coming back and getting a grant 2 or 3 cycles later. Some of them joined us through our fiscal sponsorship program. That's another neat kind of option that we have, or projects that I love that, I'll try and convince them to come in, and then they're in our family, and you just never know where those are going to lead. So it's not, it's obviously discouraging if you spent that much time and you're getting these no's, and the numbers are high. We do get about, I think last cycle, almost 600 applications, and we gave out 13 grants. So it's a brutal process for us to get those down. We could easily give out 60 grants every cohort without even thinking about it if we had the funding.
Thank you. Those are some really great points in there. No one else has anything else to add. I'll just jump on that application note. I'm wondering how each of you evaluate applications. What does the process look like once applications close on your end until you get to the point where you're awarding grants, fellowships, or in some cases, adding films to your festival?
I guess I could start. It's pretty straightforward. We have a rotating panel of 8 people from various film backgrounds who do it over the course of about 10 weeks. And we employ 3 rounds within that process to whittle down the selection. And then we have sort of one big blowout 5-hour in-person meeting. It's really the finalists. We come up with a list, and it gets further whittled down by the end of that meeting. We typically have about 20, we have more this year, about 25 professional and student finalists for the documentary film grant program. And then for our narratives, we typically have this is actually only our second year, so we have between 6 to 10 finalists, award finalists this year. And our percentage is quite high. We fund about 30% of our applications, which is pretty great. Again, regional fund, and we've been lucky to get quite a bit of funding over the last 3 years. So this year we are funding 30% of our documentary applications, and jury is still out on the narratives. Those should be announced in December. But again, we've been very, very lucky, and we have 3 more years of funding for that. And that's the process. And we decided to separate those 2 programs for a very good reason, because we had never, until last year, we hadn't really meaningfully, the Berkeley Film Foundation hadn't meaningfully supported narrative short films. And even though our guidelines said you could apply with a narrative short, it was sort of there were errant winners here and there, whereas now it is a separate program, as it should be, because reviewing documentaries and narratives together makes absolutely no sense. It was too big of a challenge to do that, and so I'm very glad we've separated those 2 programs. And so at the moment, like I said, we have filmmakers and other industry experts that serve on our panels, and that's kind of, and the group discussion happens on Submittable, which is our grant application platform, and so far that's kind of our given process. Yeah.
I can go next. Shout out to Submittable. We're also a Submittable user, and it's fantastic platform, I think, for applicants and especially reviewers, but for applicants as well. Very similar process. Given that for our flagship grants program, we're getting around 500 to 600. I mean, maybe more this next cycle, given the funding challenges. The first round, we use internal and external reviewers, and that's mostly an eligibility scan, because because we're just environmental and it's just feature length. We do get quite a few that don't quite meet, or their narratives or their shorts or something like that. And then there's usually anywhere from 3 to 4 more rounds after that, and that's internal staff. We have a program staff that's kind of culling those down through a couple different rounds of edits and brainstorming sessions. Most of that's done through Zoom, but some in person. And we try to get it to about 40 to 50 that then gets presented to the final review committee. And that's, a mix of kind of board members and higher level staff, and then some external film industry folks that we bring into the mix. And, usually we try to give out around 12. So as I said, we're getting from 600 down to 12. And that takes us, if we close the cycle like early May, it's usually open for 5 to 6 weeks, or close the open call. We're usually not making decisions until the end of August, early September. So that's about a 3 to 4 month process for us. That's it.
I can go next. So for us, maybe some similarities here. We do have a community of people who are reviewing the applications that are coming in. So every application gets at least 2 views. Most get more as they go through the cycle. We have 3 stages where we have the full group getting as many eyes as possible, and then it moves into a more kind of a top pick kind of bucket of at least 1 or 2 kind of thumbs up or high ratings. Through the process, we have a really nice mix of formally supported filmmakers, SFFILM staff, people that are in our mix. It's really important for us to have a nice array of perspectives and different stages of their own careers in that process. For all of them, and I'm not going to go through each one, but basically each one gets narrowed down. We do have finalists for each of our grants. One other thing that's important for us is at the final stage, we have a final external round where we invite previously supported filmmakers, other industry professionals that make sense for that specific grant who actually ultimately make those final decisions. So we narrow it down and we give the opportunity for filmmakers, other people to kind of be in that space to make that final kind of decision making, which yeah, I really like that process. Yeah, soon in the next month or two, we'll be announcing finalists for a majority of our grants. And then we narrow it down and then we announce recipients at the end of the year, basically, or November time, we announce everybody. So that's kind of our process.
We're pretty similar to everyone else. We have a community of screeners that help us on the first rounds. I have really intense like fear of missing something, so I tend to see the majority of all of our submissions on some level, which is insane. But I just never. I feel like somebody has taken a lot of time to make a film. It's an intense process, and somebody has dedicated likely years of their lives by the time I've seen it, or by the time it comes across my desk. So I want to make sure that I kind of honor that. But it's a couple of rounds of discussion, like first rating, then rounds of discussions, and then we call it to a short list, at which point we pull together a jury. We usually try to have some sort of industry professional. I like to always have programmers around, and I like to include a past recipient whenever I can, just to like continue that cycle. So the jury narrows down and ultimately decides the grant amount and the cohort for the year.
One added thing, just because I forgot, was you mentioned festival. Just to note that for SFFILM, because we have different things that we do, there's separate processes for each one, and so there is some synergy. We're in communication with the festival team, our education team, because there is opportunities where our films kind of weave together. We had 11 supported films at our last festival, but different processes for each bucket.
Same. Different processes, but similar beats.
One more thing I'll add too is we do fund student films. That's a program that we that I'm trying to strengthen all the time. And so even though there's not a separate process for reviewing student films, they do have their own application, which is sort of a modified core as well. And I tend to request the panelists to reserve reviewing the student films together. I'd rather they either do that in the beginning or do that at the end, just so that it's separate from the professional cohort, because they're going to be different and the experience level is completely different. And at the moment, we don't fund students working on narrative shorts. I, again, hope that will change, but this is specifically documentary films. So I just wanted to put that in there in case there's any students on the call.
Yeah, I love reading the student ones, and I was really glad that process was separated, because it's true, you want to be able to review them according to sort of their own peer group, right? And where they're at in their development as artists and as makers.
Exactly. Yeah, totally agree. I think that's important, and it's one of my favorite parts is reviewing this student selections. It's fantastic. Yes, Alexander, fabulous. Great.
Yeah, it's great. BAVC, for our Media Maker Fellowship, very similar process, like we do try to have every project get read by at least 3 people at the very beginning. And the people who are reading them are also, folks selected from our community. We, kind of like Allegra said, this is a small community, so many of us serve on each other's review panels. I've certainly reviewed for many different groups over my time in the Bay Area and being a maker myself. We do try and make sure that we cull it down to a smaller group, and then that group does get reviewed by Brittany, myself, and Jen, whoever are the co-directors of the Media Maker Fellowship. So we try similarly, like I can't look at every single one of them, but I often feel like, oh my goodness, what am I missing? What can I make sure that I see all of them just in case? And Brittany's very, very thorough with that. It does take a few months to do this. I mean, it takes a while to really to take this stuff seriously and to try and put into it in the review process a similar sort of love and care that we know that you're all putting into your projects when you're submitting them, that we try to honor and respect that as well. And then we do have a panel. We still do the panel virtually. And that panel is made up of alumni and other funders or other staff members, other people in the industry. So we are looking at, kind of a cross section of folks who can be do the panel, and we hash things out. Sometimes we argue, sometimes we disagree. Sometimes people are advocating for different ones, but I do feel like it's a very fair process. We work really hard to make things be as equitable as possible. Of course, a lot like there's the metrics of this, which is like this calculation of qualifications and really looking at that. And then there's the sort of alchemy or the art of reviewing and selecting. It's a, curatorial process. And because ours is a cohort model, we are also thinking about who are these filmmakers? Can they work together? What are their films? Are there complementary things happening? And what's going on kind of in the world? And what are these films that could be where the filmmakers can help each other? Because I think Masashi, you said that, I can't remember who said it, but like this idea of creating a community so that people actually grow together and take care of each other and support each other. I know Filmhouse does that too. We want people to really build their community and love and care for each other, because we know how isolating this can be, and we want to make sure that people are also building that community for themselves as well. I don't know, Brittany, did I miss anything? Brittany's the one who's very meticulous about this stuff. Really amazing, amazing, incredible person who's really has seen the evolution of this. I came on 5 years ago, but Brittany's been doing this longer than me, and I really respect and appreciate your eye for fairness and having an ethical review of everything.
Thank you. No, I think you covered everything important. And if it left questions, people can put questions in the chat. But yeah, I did want to move on to a big question that we had prepared. And I think there's been rumblings about this in the chat a little bit. Given the decrease in public funding and other obstacles that our industry is facing, especially right now, how is your organization preparing to support the future of independent film?
I could start this one. It's a hard one. If first off, because I think maybe a little bit of a misconception that the Redford Center is a non-endowed organization, so we're raising all of our own money out there with a lot of the same foundations and folks and philanthropists that filmmakers are. And I know that our fundraising and development team has really been focused this year, given the change of events, on educating and engaging our donors around really how important this field is, and that it can't, you can donate to frontline political activities and campaigns and things like that, and not completely cancel your arts and film funding. So they're spending a lot of time educating these, philanthropists in particular. And we're doing the best we can. We're fortunate in a way to not have had any federal or even state funding. So we haven't lost anything, but we're busy trying to build our pool of grants and create more grants other than this big 2-year cycle that we're on, and just try and fill some of the gaps here. We've had so many filmmakers reach out in the last 3 months. They've lost the biggest grant they had that was, federally supported. So we're hearing about it on the daily with our current cohort. and trying to match make for them, and then spend a lot of time educating these donors. We are starting to see some of that impact in a positive way. And I have a little bit of a lens of this or over this through our fiscal sponsorship program. And I feel like I've seen just in the last 2 months, a lot of the projects suddenly start to be back raising real money with some of these philanthropists that all went very quiet and got scared in the last few months. So I think that's how we're looking at it. We're just trying to fill some of the gap ourselves.
I can jump in. BAVC Media is hitting our 50th anniversary next year. And as an organization, we've always been a place about that has really focused on access and providing opportunities for people who are makers to have access. And we mean access in such a wide range of things, right? From gear and technical classes to really understanding what's happening in the field. And of course, this fellowship and grant that we provide. We are a convener that is really supporting the broadest sort of media community across the country, from makers to educators to nonprofit organizations, community media, independent, all forms of independent media, whether that's organizational or individual. So we're definitely in the mix of this conversation, and we know how important it is, and we're also partnering with folks who are talking about that, the future of film. There's a bunch of different folks who are doing this work right now, and we participate in those conversations, and we participate in looking at what's happening and talking to donors and talking to funders, sort of the same, Jonathan, like educating. I believe we need to be educating donors, whether that's large institutional foundational donors to individual people, to people focusing on how can they support or help independent makers. So I think right now is the time to be paying attention to all of that and to look. I mean, a lot of documentary film, is broadcast on public media. I think we still there. It hasn't been completely 100% eliminated, so we still have a responsibility to be paying attention to like what's happening to public media. But we also need to be looking at where are the other venues. And BAVC, we're all like kind of do it yourself kind of DIY folks as well. So like, how do we come up with new strategies for distribution, and how are we looking at ways that we can support makers and getting their films out there? So we're definitely in the mix of those kinds of conversations, and like to be able to be part of the sort of, I don't understand soup to nuts, but whatever that phrase is, like from the beginning to the middle to the end, like we invest in makers all the way through. This program in particular is for early stage, early production, mid production, but you can't get rid of us. We're kind of like barnacles. We like y'all, what, and we want to create more and more opportunities for filmmakers to be able to come together and learn. That's what our VERSE program is about. That's what some of our other activities that we're doing is to try and really build the field and support each other.
I always end up saying cradle to grave, and I'm like, that's the worst. That's the worst. Like, I don't know what nuts are in the soup, but like, there's got to be a better one. Um, yeah, I guess I just kind of want to echo what everyone is saying. We're a queer organization. We're a queer arts nonprofit in 2025, and it is a brutal landscape. Funding for us. I think that's partially why organizations like Frameline exist, is when these things happen, we are perhaps better equipped to weather these crazy storms than individual artists. So yeah, I kind of see it as my job right now to figure it out. And I do think a lot of that it does stem from like we need to educate our funders. I need to be able to quickly pivot when I see certain funding streams starting to dry up. Like we were hit incredibly hard by government funding and also corporate funding. Those are like two of our major income streams, and we had to turn and figure out, okay, well, what is left to us? And those are our people and those are our individual contributors. And how do we speak to them and talk about the importance of storytelling in times like these? And like, yes, it's incredibly critical to fund everything. But if we don't have the people out here telling the stories, then we never change and we get caught in a constant doom loop. I don't know if I have a real answer, like what are we doing to do this? But for me, it's like, okay, well, this funding stream isn't working. How am I going to find the next one? And just keep moving and try to put the pieces together and do it in a way that I can still maintain as much of my programmatic portfolio as possible.
I do think just Frameline existing is like a form of resisting. So I appreciate Frameline just, doing
chugging
everything.
along.
Yeah, exactly. Just existing, honestly. We are, also, I think like everyone's still kind of figuring it out. This is not new, but it's ever changing, this landscape that we're in. There are two things that we are doing currently. The first is investing in distribution and impact in a little more meaningful way. Our philosophy is we want social impact films to be out in the world as fast as possible. And so we're trying to figure out how to do that, because we want films that are ready to go to really spark conversations over the course of the next 6 to 12 months, and really inject some funding into impact and distribution, because that's how people see these films. That's how conversations are sparked. It's how change really happens, and I think that's our direction at the moment. So again, we're figuring out how to do that, but that's been a meaningful conversation over the last several weeks. The other thing, I've kind of been doing naturally, but also, just wanting to help our fellow organizations is just form more partnerships. The partnership model is just one way to really help everybody, and promote other organizations' work, bring our audience to other organizations, and just sharing resources in whatever way we can. So that's really something that I personally care a lot about, and that means universities, it means BAVC, it means other funding organizations in Northern California. And I love a non-traditional screening. I love doing that kind of thing. And so my wish list item, because we're a staff of one, so I don't have the capacity to do as much as I'd like, but a wish list item is also would be number 3, which is to promote our grantees' work as much as possible. It's always been my goal to try my best to tell our audience, like, this grantee is having a screening on Wednesday, or this person has a GoFundMe campaign up, just promoting our grantees' work, because we fund at various stages. That's something that I would really love to do more. We'll see, but again, it's all about capacity. But it is just sharing what we can, because we do only have 2 grant cycles per year, and then one that's closed. But there's a lot of months in between, and I know people need access to funding and networking opportunities. Cinemama has fantastic networking opportunities, everybody. I'm sure you're aware of them. So yeah, those are my big 3.
I just want to. I don't know what other panels that you all have convened, but if there's a distribution one, I think that would be incredibly exciting because that's also Frameline does have a distribution department, and really thinking about what are alternative ways, what are new ways of distro and getting work out there, and you know, working with other art house cinemas. What is it? What is it that's new and different? I feel like we've been doing pretty much the same thing for a while, and it's like, how can we rethink this in this moment? I'd be happy to hear that.
Yeah, I don't know how much more I could. I am in full agreement that this is an opportunity for us to kind of envision and think of a more equitable, better future for storytellers. For SFFILM, yeah, I mean, I think we do our very best with any kind of decreased funding that it doesn't impact our supported filmmakers or audiences. So it's all behind the scenes, right? We're just trying to find ways where we can solve for some of that. You know, I'm a filmmaker myself. I went to SF State and I got my film degree. And I always thought that being a filmmaker meant that you had tenacity, that you knew how to make your films happen, and you have that thing in you to hustle to make your project happen. And I feel like we're getting to a point where we're asking a lot of the filmmaking community, and not just making the film, but the climate, and once you make it, what's happening. I think something has shifted. And so, whether it's at the film house and us, I mentioned all the benefits of film house, but one of the other benefits is just sitting together and thinking and coping and being in community. I think that is so important right now. We've been trying our in different ways. So I think for all of our organizations, we have on paper the things we do, and then we all know that we're doing things outside of that, right? When we have gotten calls and emails from our supported filmmakers who have lost significant amount of funding, and it's very hard. And so we'll go back to the previous supporter funders of that project. We at SFFILM, at our film house, we've done some crowdsourcing events more recently. Like, we're finding different ways to help our filmmaking community. But those are all small pieces, I think, for us to come together. There was, something that I think about was at the beginning of COVID. But the beginning of COVID, a lot of the organizations here in the Bay Area came together and had to navigate this whole different world together, and there was this solidarity that was quite beautiful. And I think that legacy continues on. But as we're thinking about whether it is distribution or ways we can collectively get our filmmakers to get their films to that endpoint, and I think we all, in different ways, we can support each other and support the filmmaking community. I think that's very much needed. So whatever envisioning happens for that, and sometimes I wonder if that comes from the filmmaking community or if it comes from the organizations, or it's that's us working together. But I think that San Francisco Bay Area, just this, we're known for community innovation. I think we can figure some stuff out. And if we have more people like this in the same room together, I'm sure we can figure out some solutions.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to start with some questions from the chat. A few people mentioned budgets when we were talking about what you're looking for in applications and for filmmakers, specifically being nervous about budgets that seemed low. But in relation to that, what are you thinking about with regards to budgets, considering the lack of funding and the disappearing funding that's happening recently? Dawn, I know you have thoughts on this.
Yeah, I guess I mentioned budget, so especially being too small. It's, there's degrees. Obviously, there's just so small that, especially if it's a feature film, unless they're just making the filmmakers making the entire thing on their iPhone, which isn't impossible. There's different degrees. So I think if it's still a realistic budget, but it's bare bones, and it's the director is also the editor, and there's explanations for, behind why this thing is maybe really tight, and that should be part of the application. And you should almost have really like a bare bones budget, and then one. And I tell fiscal sponsor projects this all the time. Have one that's real. If you could actually go out and hire some of the people that you need, you're not just doing this all with a team of 3 or something, because you just never know when you're going to present to a real donor who's not at all scared of a real size budget. So, maybe that's a little bit, well, which one do you present? If you have a real one and a kind of pie in the sky one, I think there's a happy medium. But if you're cutting areas that you wouldn't normally cut, you might want to speak to that in the application, that this is and what you're doing all the posts yourself, like have an explanation behind why, the staffing or something like that. And it'll usually prompt a conversation with us. If we really like a project but the budget seems a little low, we will then reach out to the filmmakers to have a conversation as part of the grants process. It's not just you got one shot at this and, oh, your budget's off, so you're not making it through to the next round. I've had a lot of those conversations, and I've been convinced after them that the filmmaker does know what they're doing. And ideally, yes, they would like more money, but they're able to pull it off. That's as best as I could answer that one.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I do think it's important for people to look at like what is realistic, look at similar films, how much do they make, how much did they make that film for? I rely a lot on Robert Bahar, who is wrote basically like the budget that is on the International Documentary Association's website, and really I've, worked with him and had him kind of dissect budgets that I'd worked on with folks. And, he basically says, your budget is the storytelling, your financial storytelling of your film. And I love hearing that and thinking about that. Now, I'm not like, super math person or anything like that, but I love math and I love numbers, and I like budgets. So for me, I agree with you, Jonathan. Like, I really want to see that the person is understanding what it takes to make a film. If they're going to travel to 5 different spots and they're not even including their travel expenses in their budget, then I'm like, how are you doing that? And even if you got all of that covered, you've got to be able to say that in your budget, like, oh, I have somebody who's covering all of our flights, or we've got, something happening. I really recommend that I had a mentor of mine tell me when they looked at one of my budgets early on, say, you're not even in this budget. Like, you're like the director, producer, writer, blah, 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 and you haven't even put yourself in the budget. Like, you're doing not only yourself a disservice, because maybe you're not going to get all of the money. You're never going to get the money that you deserve for the 7 years or 5 years you've put into this film, but you have to at least write down what kind of an amount that would be sort of reasonable for you. It never feels 100% reasonable, but you've got to put something else, you've got to put something down. And what he said to me was like, it's not just a disservice to you, it's a disservice to everybody who comes after you. For anybody who thinks it's okay to not have your director, producer, or your writer, if you're doing archival work, to have your archival person. And Alexander, your question beyond survival, like here's the thing is like your budget it can be aspirational. It could be like, this is what it would really take to make this film. And then you can also have this like realistic, like here it is. How do we know? I'm just going to keep run on a couple of these questions that are popping up really fast. How do we know how much to pay ourselves? Again, I think it's like an important thing to talk to other people in the field and to think about that. I mean, I have seen people, there's a range of what people put in their budgets to pay themselves. I mean, if you think about it, if you put a flat fee of $50,000 and you know it's taken you 5 years to make that film, that means you're going to make maybe $10,000 a year off of the project. And that again could be an aspirational amount that you put in there. But you have to put something, and it's got to be realistic, you know? And we know that there are certain things that are hard costs. Actually, and I'm not going to continue on with this question because we're having a budget workshop, and somebody should put, did you just put that in there? You're so good, Brittany.
That was impeccable timing on both of your parts. Thank you.
But Brittany, what was the other part of that question? Because I feel like it was not just budgets, it was something else. Or was that
How
it?
are you thinking about budgets given the lack of funding right now? I mean, I think in particular with docs, um, public television stressors are a big factor.
I would ask people to tell us when they've lost funding in the budget excuse me, in the application. We have a field, in the core that asks you to explain your current funders or potential funders. I would add that, or that you even, applied and were denied. But I did find it helpful this year when people mentioned that they had been that their funding had been rescinded. Not necessarily because it gave more weight to the application, but it actually just, I guess, helped me quantify how many people in the East Bay in our region are suffering from those cuts, and as sort of a data tool for me personally, I found that interesting to know, and you can tell us the amount as well. I was shocked by how high some of these numbers were. This money that was given and then taken away, which I still can't believe. But that is helpful. Or, you could even tell us funds that have folded altogether, that don't exist anymore, that you had either applied for and never heard back from. You could, don't explain in massive detail, but you could feel free to tell us what happened. Yeah.
For me, when I look at budgets, I want them to be real. I want them to be realistic, and it shows me that you're. So I would encourage you to be as real and legitimate as you possibly can. Now you might be able to go and get it done for half of that amount, but I want to see a certain level of understanding and professionalism and thought in the budget itself. Because the budget does ultimately show your priorities. And yeah, it's the story of the film in numbers. And if you've got this super cheap budget, but you're not paying anybody anything, that's telling me an awful lot about you, your priorities, and do I want to align with that. So I just be as honest and legitimate as you possibly can, and then always look for a deal. That would be that's what, and for our process, I'm not going to come back next year and be like, well, you said you were gonna, spend $10,000 on travel, but you really spent 20, and so explain yourself. I mean, some might, but that's not how it works for us. I think budgets are, somebody put it in the chat, are living documents, and I do it myself. I rob Peter to pay Paul, and I move things around, and it's just the story of what you intend to do.
Yeah, on our end, we don't really audit our projects, right? We're not looking to make sure that the budget that you submit is exactly what you ultimately do. We know it's not going to be. Things will change with your project. I think it goes back to the application, and as we talk about realistic, what is your project? What is the scale of your project? And what is the impact you want to have with your project? And how does the budget reflect that? And so when I'm looking at an application, I'm looking at from beginning to end, and I'm just adding layers. And the applications that usually move forward is there's a narrative that's happening here. And I understand it. This is the story, this is the team, and this is the budget. And if those are all in alignment, whether it is a $500,000, 3 million, like if it makes sense for the project, then I think it's, for us, it is fine. Because we understand what the scale of that project is. And if it is off, right? If it is a scale of a 3 million, but it's only 200,000, then we know there's something off there. And so for us, looking at an application, when those all are in sync, that to me builds more trust than a budget that is a little on the shaky side. And again, it goes back to community. I think like making films is a team sport, and having a community of people around you that you can pass a budget to, a producer, another filmmaker who made a similar scale project, and goes, how does this look? And I'm totally agreement of paying yourself, making sure that you allocate funds to pay yourself and your team. That is, whether ultimately that happens or not, seeing it in there is important. We one thing I didn't mention is we have an investment program where we bring equity partners to feature films, and that is something that always comes up of an equity funder, a donor looking at that budget and going like, oh, this is not gonna, this is not gonna pay the team, and it brings up potentially more red flags and for specific types of funders.
We're coming in on the end. I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question. And this is kind of like, I'm mushing together two questions from the chat a little bit. We'd love to hear your thoughts on work samples, what you're looking for in scenes, trailers, sizzles, depending on what you ask for different funds. And I think, if in the case of development funds, R&D or pre-production, what kind of visual elements you might be looking for to illustrate the vision of that project that might not be ready to submit, a full work sample.
I'll start and be as fast as I can. So I think it depends on the stage that you're applying for. I would say that if you're nearing distribution, if you're in distribution and you provide me with a 3-minute sample, I'm going to be very annoyed because we have a limit of 10 minutes. And so if you are in distribution, I want to see close to or a 10-minute sample for your project. And so just technically speaking, that's really what we want. But other than that, I really ask that people not repeat footage. I'm going to pause, let that sink in. Please don't repeat footage in the same sample. It drives, I'm speaking for myself here, but it does crazy. And then, I think it's a big challenge to create a work sample, and BAVC has done countless workshops on this very topic, and we could spend an entire hour talking about this. But I'd really personally like to see the texture of your film. Again, it may not be final, and you're going to be color correcting, you're going to be changing things, but I would love to see pieces of edited footage that give me an indication of the story you're trying to tell. And I know that is a very broad statement, but I want to see, I want to feel the tone of your film. I want to feel the texture of it and get a sense of the story, and more importantly, the characters in your story. Obviously you can't build a character's arc in 10 minutes, but having some kind of indication of who we're about to spend time with, I really like to see that personally in these projects. I will add one more thing as quickly as possible, which is that contrary to a lot of the other funders, I actually watch the clip at the end of the application. A lot of people watch it first. I watch it at the end because I like to read about your project and get an idea of what this is in my mind, and then go in with your sample. And sometimes if those are completely mismatched, it really shocks me. And it's happened in both ways. Either the proposal is really compelling and the clip is not, or the clip is fantastic and the proposal is super boring. So having those align, I find to be really important. And I'll leave it there.
That's really funny because I like to watch the clip first and read nothing.
A lot of people do it that way, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really just personal preference, but like you can't tell the whole story in your sample or in your application. Like I can't read it, you can't tell it. So like you're making a commercial for what you're doing. So like tell the major story and leave me wanting more and I think it's an art form in and of itself, but that's what I'm looking. Can you tell me this story in the visual in this filmic medium without me having to read too much background to understand what's going on? That's why I flip it, because if I find myself having to be like what and then like going to read it's already, we already have a hill to climb at that point. But I guess I say this all the time. It's like, say less, use fewer words. How can you be impactful with fewer words? Because you've got people who are reading a lot of things, and it doesn't need to be flowery. It just needs to be right. You know, it needs to be the right words, concise to get it, or it needs to be the right clips that tell this story that leave me interested in like, oh well, when I want to see what other routes this goes down. But don't try to tell me everything.
A few things on my end. If it's earlier stages, I would say a lookbook, and there are some really wonderful lookbook examples online. You can do a lot with a lookbook. A previous film, a short film that you might have. I'd say if you're using a previous short, if it's hopefully connected with your new project, whether tonally or if there's something about the acting, something that's in there that relates to it, I think it's really helpful. If it's a project that you're already working on with the footage, I prefer actual edited footage over a trailer. I really don't like trailers. Like I'd rather spend time, sit with these characters, documentary or narrative. And again, as Isabella said, like understanding your voice and tone in it it's much more helpful for me than watching like a sizzle reel or a trailer.
Okay, I'll say one quick thing. I know we're running out of time. So yeah, yes to all the above. And this is probably really obvious, but if it's an earlier stage film and it's a character-based documentary specific, which most are, some kind of sample footage of the actual character that's featured, and you just really want to see how compelling this person is on screen, and that could just be a 2 to 3 minute clip from a little interview or just something of them. You'd be surprised how many applications we get with no footage of the characters involved. That's it.
Well, thank you everyone so much for this entire conversation, to the entire panel, to everyone in the chat, for everyone contributing to the conversation. Thank you to Brittany for leading us through, and Dawn for giving BAVC's perspective as well. This has been really amazing, and I feel like we could continue talking for a very long time. I did drop in a couple of links into the chat a couple moments ago in the event that folks had to hop off. It's really important to us that you take the time to fill out the briefest survey I've ever seen in my life. It's 3 questions. It helps us inform what these workshops are moving forward and how to serve you all as part of our community. So please take a moment to do that. We will make sure, thank you, Brittany, for sharing that again, and we'll send it out over email, but it really means a lot to us. I also want to say that we have another incredible workshop coming up in a few weeks on September 24th. The link is in the chat. Brittany just pasted that in there. It's another free virtual workshop. We'll be doing a line-by-line breakdown of budget, as we mentioned earlier in this conversation. So again, thank you everyone for everything tonight, for coming together to talk, and for spending your time with us. Really appreciate you all.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you.
Bye. Good night.